I want to welcome you to this special dinner to celebrate the third Biennial Conference. My name is Lindiwe Majele Simanda. I'm the chairperson of the local organizing committee, and I'm standing here on behalf of my colleagues who've been working behind the scenes to make this happen. My duty today is just to moderate this brief session where we are honored to have our VIPs. I want to recognize the chairman of ARUA, African Research Universities Alliance, Prof. Barnabas Nawangwe, who is very familiar to all of us now. He's also the Vice Chancellor of Makerere University. Thank you, sir. I also want to recognize the Vice Chancellors from our hosting universities. We are hosted jointly by the University of Witwatersrand and the University of Pretoria. Professor Tawane Kupe, thank you, sir, for joining us, and Professor Zeblon Vilagazi, thank you. I want to recognize our Secretary General of ARUA, Professor Ernest Ariti, who spent sleepless nights. This is a man who told me that dinners are special, and he said we should find a special venue. We told him that there is no better place in South Africa than Future Africa Dining Room. So he came up to me this evening and said, not bad, it's good. I would like to recognize all our vice chancellors, the heads of ARUA Centers of Excellence, our speakers, participants who've all done an excellent job in the last 2 days. The work is not over yet. We've got one more day to go. So it's half celebration just to celebrate that we are here. Without further ado, I'm going to ask my Vice Chancellor, Professor Kupe, to come up and introduce our guest of honor. Over to you, Professor Kupe.
A very good evening to everyone, and again, it's a pleasure to host you here at Future Africa. This is, our current home in the future. That's what Future Africa means. So I would like to acknowledge a few people before I introduce our honorable guest. So Professor Barnabas Nawangwe, the Vice Chancellor of the Makerere University, but here in his capacity as the Chairman of the Board of ARUA. Thank you again, sir. And then Professor Zeblon Vilagazi, my co-host and former colleague. We used to enjoy the same post when I worked at that place where he works, which is Wits University, and we had a great time together. Then Professor Ernest Arite, our esteemed Chair, Secretary General of ARUA, the founding Secretary General, so it goes down in his legacy. Professor Lindiwe Majele Simanda, the chairperson of the local organizing committee, and colleagues, fellow vice chancellors, and those representing vice chancellors. I think 3 people, including Professor Hutchinson and others, have introduced to me as representing other vice chancellors. We are also honored tonight to have the executive director at the National Research Foundation, Dr. Aldo Strubel, who has supported many of our efforts. And of course, distinguished guests and participants. This is an academic conference. So we start with all of this list of honors of the people holding positions. But the most important people at the conference are actually the academics presenting the papers and presenting the science. We work to enable your activities, although hierarchically we appear to be the more important people. So you are welcome, and thank you again for what you do. Then, of course, our most important, our guest of honor, Dr. David Nabarro. I've had the honor of meeting Dr. David Nabarro, but not here in South Africa. I met him at Montpellier University in 2019. In fact, at a dinner like this, we sat next to each other, and he told me of his wonderful work. I've seen him multiple times since then on television screens. most recently, I think on the BBC or CNN. To try and introduce him is actually to be presumptuous and almost very silly, because what are you actually going to say? Because he's a man of such achievements, accomplishments, and such stellar contributions to the world that makes such a difference that there are no ways to describe him. So I'm going to try something that some people might think is fairly not capturing the stature and the contributions of the man. It's an honor to introduce a man I respect and admire a lot. If it was in my village where I grow up, in my village, I would say, when I grow up, I would like to be like him. But I'm an old man now, so the growing up part actually is kind of gone. Yeah. There are some names that are synonymous, or some people that are synonymous with achievement and contribution to humanity that is greater than the sum of men. When we talk of management of pandemics, the name Dr. David Nabarro comes up. Here I'm talking about collective action on some of the most pressing and complex challenges, responding to the avian and pandemic influenza, promoting food security and sustainable food systems, ending malnutrition, combating Ebola, malaria, COVID-19, child obesity, and promoting the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and advancing efforts relating to climate change, all championed through the man, Dr. David Nabarro. During my opening address on day one of this conference, I spoke about transdisciplinarity being my passion, and I did confess that I've overheard people call me Mr. Transdisciplinarity, but that is a wannabe kind of stuff, you know. Some people like me are wannabes. They want to be things that they will actually never accomplish. Now, and I did confess that this evening, though, I want to take my hat off to the real Mr. Transdisciplinarity, Dr. David Nabarro. This is the real deal, and this is the fake deal. I'm talking of a medical doctor who has been a special envoy for food systems, advisor for climate issues, advisor on pandemics, curator for food systems policy dialogues, and advisors to heads of state. There are no wicked problems that he cannot tackle and address in a systematic manner. My job is to introduce him as our guest of honor. I don't take away from what he is going to say. Mine is to thank him for what he will say and give him the floor to address. He's a true friend of the University of Pretoria, and I suspect many other universities, but I am speaking for myself, and a true darling and friend of Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. David Nabarro, this is the real deal. The fake Mickey Mouse is exiting the stage.
Hey, don't go away too far, please. Don't go away. Hello. Hello. Just checking to see whether the sound works. Is the sound? I was just hoping you wouldn't go away too far. Thank you very much indeed. Really, Professor Coupe. Now, honestly, that was just the most amazing, wonderful, beautiful introduction. I wish I was there. I said I would come and be with you when we sat together at the event organized by Louise Fresco. And I'm sorry I'm not there, but I'm really honored that you've invited me to come here today and to talk. And if for any reason the sound doesn't work, if it's difficult, just let me know, and then I can adapt and adjust. So if anybody can hear, if you can hear me, just if you could put one hand up in the air like that. Thank you. Perfect. That's it. Enough. Good, good, good. Right, you're having your dinner, and I've got the honor of talking to you while you're having dinner. And I want to start just by saying that I'm truly delighted to be here at an event, to be introduced by the Vice-Chancellor, Professor Tawana Coupe, also to be alongside Vice-Chancellor at Makerere University, Professor Barnabas Nwangwe, who's also the chair of the African Research Universities Alliance Board. And I've heard Professor Ernest Arete, ARUA Secretary General, being given a lot of thanks, but you deserve it, every bit of it. So I'd like to add my appreciation to you, Professor Arete. To Professor Lindiwe Majele Sibanda, you are my inspiration. You are really one of the most extraordinary connectors that I've ever met, and I'm delighted that you've invited me. I'd like to greet Salim Abdul Karim. I want to give a special thank you to you, Salim, for the inspiration that you've given me, and particularly for the opportunity to talk with you and your wife during that session that we had at the beginning of COVID. To all Vice Chancellors present, to all distinguished speakers and participants present, thank you for the chance to give this short address. I'm going to talk about the most extraordinary public health challenge that exists in the world today. It is poverty and inequity, because that's the challenge that those of us working in public health just have to address at all times. Wealth and power differentials lead to much worse health and health experiences among those who are worst off. But these inequities in health have been cruelly revealed by the current pandemic of the new coronavirus that causes COVID-19. So the subject of my discussion today is, what does COVID-19 tell us about health inequities, and what should we do about them? And I've been through the program of the conference, and I've realized that actually many of you here are going to answer this question. You're going to look in detail at relationships between COVID-19 and inequities. And so I'd like to give you 5 areas in which you might like to be thinking as you're trying to work through the relationships between COVID-19 and inequity. And let's see whether or not these 5 ideas resonate at all with you. They're quite easy to remember because each of the words begins with the letter P. And I will go through them one by one, but I'll just give you the list now and I'll repeat it again at the end. First, I want to talk about the pandemic itself. Second, I'm going to talk about the purpose of the response. What's it all about? Third, I'd like to talk about people. Fourth, public health. And fifth, I'm going to ask the question, where is the program? So I'll just say the words again: pandemic, purpose, people, public health, and program. First, the pandemic. You know, it's really interesting. This virus doesn't kill many people. If you've got relatively weak health services, you might end up with a mortality rate of 2 or 3% when you've got 100 people infected. If you've got good health services, you can probably push the mortality down. And survival rates have got much better recently. With some of the new antiviral treatments, I'm sure survival will improve. And so it's perfectly reasonable that there should be questions asked, why make a fuss about this new virus? And for me, the one thing I want to really repeat again and again is we should be making a fuss about it because it's a new virus, because we don't know very much about it. Anybody who says it's just like a mild flu you know that they don't know what they're talking about. Anybody who says that it's not a problem except for those who are relatively old or people who've got diabetes, they don't know what they're talking about. This is a virus that is really quite nasty. It's a virus that even when people recover, in about 1 in 20, at least in Western Europe, is associated with a long morbidity. And for many, it's really disturbing. Long COVID is a huge social and economic problem, and it's affecting vast numbers of young people throughout the world. So don't just imagine that all we need to worry about is the relatively few people who die. This is a virus that seems to be able to cause lasting damage, particularly to epithelial cells. And it also seems to have the capacity to encourage clotting. And I think there is a lot more to be found out about this virus. I also think that anybody who says this pandemic is near its end is probably wrong. My own view is that we're still in the first half, and that it may well go on for a lot longer. It may well be a virus that stays with us, but it's also a virus that will go on causing outbreaks. And therefore, we have to treat it with a lot of respect. So a virus, dangerous, here to stay. Still, we don't know enough about it, capable of causing nasty morbidity in young people. And perhaps the most important thing to say about it is it's a virus that's mutating. And you know it's mutating. You've had already that challenge in South Africa. And there are constant variants of concern emerging, and they will go on being a feature of this pandemic. I mean, I hope I'm wrong. I hope it disappears tomorrow, but I'm just thinking it's unlikely. So my P for pandemic is very much virus here to stay. My second P for purpose, is when things start to get difficult. What is the purpose for the global, national or local response to this virus? What are people trying to do? Save lives? Okay. Then there ought to be much wider availability of vaccines, because vaccines save lives. Keep the economy going? Not really. I mean, why are countries going to lockdown so quickly when they get cases and not trying to institute proper public health measures if they're really trying to keep the economy going? In fact, lockdowns are desperately bad for economies, as you know, and you're discussing it in the conference. To keep one country safe and not worry about the rest of the world. Yeah, there's a bit of that going on. In fact, every time I talk to parliamentarians or to ministers in European countries, in the US, I ask them, what are you actually trying to do? And I never get a very clear answer, but fundamentally, the word is, we're trying to look after our own. And I say to them, that's no good. Regardless of me being a person who has competence in global public health, I'm telling you, and this is what I say to them, I'm telling you, it makes no sense at all to be trying to deal with this pandemic just inside your national borders. To deny people entry because they happen to be vaccinated with vaccines outside your own health service. Or to insist on keeping loads of vaccine in your cold stores and denying that vaccine going into the COVAX vaccine sharing scheme. I mean, that's what's happening. That's what's happening in the UK. It's what's happening in Europe. It's what's happening in the US. They're not focusing on the purpose of tackling a global pandemic. They're focusing on national issues. People tell me that leaders of European countries, even the US, are doing this because that will get them more votes. I say, really? I mean, is anybody actually telling the people of these countries that are hoarding all the world's vaccines that doing this will not necessarily make their people safer? It might, if they concentrate entirely on vaccine as their mode of prevention, it might actually make them susceptible, because if they don't use other precautions besides vaccines, they might end up suddenly having a variant comes that can escape the protection afforded by current vaccines. Then where will they be? So I'm trying to say to these leaders of countries that are just focusing on their own national borders and their own national interest, that it's not a good idea to be just focusing on protecting their people, because actually no one individual in our world is safe in the face of this particular pathogen, or indeed any transmissible pathogen, until we're all safe. And so it's absolutely a no-brainer, as far as I'm concerned, that work on COVID should be done for the global good and not for a national good. So I think we need attention to what's the purpose. And for me, the only purpose is treat this as a global issue. Third point, people. Sometimes when I'm listening to the news, particularly in Europe, I hear remarks like, the problem with this pandemic is that it's young people. They're just not doing what they should be doing. They're having too much fun. They're not wearing their masks. We blame them, say ministers or government leaders. And they then promptly put restrictions on the behavior of young people or of people in particular places. Or in Austria, it's now restrictions on the behavior of unvaccinated people. Well, I learnt in my own work earlier in 2014-15, working with some great South Africans and other Africans, I learnt that in dealing with infectious diseases, the pathogen is the problem, people are the solution. People are never the problem. But if you treat people as though they're the problem, then you've got difficulties. Then they will get really fed up. They will start to get cross with the authorities. They will start to bristle when they're told to do things. They will get really cross if they're told to mask up when the incidence starts to climb. People are the solution. So take people into your arms, make them part of the response, because that's the only way to do this. I remember at one point in Ebola, there was a need to put part of a urban settlement into some degree of movement restriction, and the army was called in, and they came with weapons, and accidentally a weapon got fired and somebody got killed. And I remember the president of the country I was in saying, we will not use lethal force in helping people to cope with this disease. And the guns weren't used again, and people and the soldiers worked together. And I think that's right. Fourth, public health. Everybody, I'll bet, everybody in the room eating their dinner tonight is super aware that when you've got an infectious disease, what do? You are on the alert. You find the cases. You find them quickly. You find them early. You find them with great sympathy and warmth. And you get them to isolate. And you look after them while they're isolating. In some villages that I've been to in West Africa, they have little houses in the village that are especially for people to isolate when there's disease. but the food is always brought to the door. The water is brought to them. And then you find those with whom they've been in contact, and you isolate them, you put them next door. And in that way, you interrupt transmission. And now it's case finding and contact tracing, backed up by good testing, backed up by really sympathetic isolation. And that's the technique. And then when things get very bad, if you've got a whole village affected, yes, for a period, you have to isolate that village. But you do it with exploration. You do it with understanding. You do it with respect. Public health is the key to dealing with infectious diseases, particularly one like this, the high R0, if you don't have anything else to reduce the spread. Where is the talk about public health in Western Europe or in the US? Where is it? All they talk about is, are we going back into restrictions? Yes, no. But not setting up a good quality, locally integrated public health scheme that is capable of finding people who may have the disease and isolating them quickly and supporting them with an integrated backup of all the different local organizations. That's what you ought to be doing. But their attempts at introducing these kinds of public health measures have been amazing failures. And I'm absolutely convinced that there are many, many situations in Africa where you have done public health right, just as you have engaged people as partners in the response right. And you're doing so well. And then fifth, program. I've been working with WHO on COVID since the end of January last year. And I worked really closely with Tedros, even though we were competitors for WHO some years ago. It's beautiful. He's asked me to work with him and I'm enjoying it no end. And periodically I ask him, I said, Tedros, what's gone wrong? How come we've just not got the solidarity between nations on dealing with COVID? How come when we try to bring them together in the World Health Assembly, they're just not comfortable with each other? How come COVAX is not receiving its proper supplies of vaccine? How come we've got these terrible vaccine inequities? Where is that solidarity gone? And he says, well, that's the world we're in now. But then the one great, beautiful thing that we see is that at least throughout Africa and through the African Union, African Centers for Disease Control, African Union Development Agency, there is solidarity in Africa on dealing with COVID. I mean, it's still not good enough because there are totally insufficient vaccines getting through. It's still not good enough because you don't have enough diagnostics. Still not good enough because there's not enough investment in treatment. It's still not good enough because you're not getting the PPE and other equipment that's needed. But it's better than just about everywhere else in the world. But as a world, as a whole, it's really, really unfortunate that there is not a global program in response to COVID-19, because there's not. And without a program that is dealing the world as one, then poor nations are going to struggle. They will not have the balance of payments reserve in order to be able to finance people. So in conclusion, there are 5 Ps that matter. First P, understand the pandemic, where the virus is, and it's going to be around for some time. And it is going to go on causing trouble and anxiety. It is going to go on mutating and forming variants. It's going to go on leading to surges and quite high levels of sickness and death in susceptible populations. Please don't let anyone think it's gone. We need to bring it together with other parts of communicable diseases, other parts of public health, so that we approach public health in the totality, but taking account of what COVID has taught us about the reality of inequities in health. We need to have a purpose in responding to COVID that is continental and global. All people having all the facilities and trying to move away from just individual nations looking after their own. It's not sustainable, it's not tenable. Number three, people are the solution, they're not the problem. And working with people, the state working with people, it's the only way to go. It's difficult sometimes, especially when people are feeling unhappy with the role of the state, but it's the only way. Fourth, public health really matters. And investments in public health have been steadily dropping in real terms in Western Europe and the US. Don't let it happen in Africa. Public health, the subject that you're all working on, is at the heart of our collective future. And fifth, please get your governments, when they come to the special World Health Assembly in November, to focus on the importance of a global program to deal with COVID-19 now, as well as focusing on a stronger treaty to deal with future pandemics. Thank you for the chance to join you. I hope you have a really great dinner, and I hope I'll be in Pretoria before long joining you. Thank you.
Dr. Nabarro, please don't go away. I'm now going to ask Professor Ariti to come up and deliver the thank you remarks.
Thank you very, very, very much, Dr. Nabarro. Before I say thank you to Dr. Nabarro, I should apologize to him. And what's the apology for? This evening, we've listened to him deliver to us a wonderful lecture on the 5 Ps. But I'm apologizing to him because I invited him at very short notice. You know, the steering committee for the conference had met, and then I agreed on who the speaker should be. And his name had been suggested right from the beginning. That was sometime in May. And then I forgot to invite him. Not out of malice, but I simply forgot. When you're growing old, you tend to forget things. And 3 weeks before the conference, I realized we didn't have a speaker for the dinner. So I consulted Lindway, and I sent him an email. And here we are, that such a big man agreed to do this with just 3 weeks' notice. So thank you very, very much, and I'm very, very sorry. Many people in his position would have simply have said, the notice is too short, I can't do it, but he did it. And I've learned this evening the 5 Ps. I wasn't a bar student, so I remember it was the pandemic, it was purpose, it was people, and then public health, and finally program. So I remember everything. I think I'm going to keep it.
Brilliant.
And use it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we assembled here from the African Research University Alliance. Grateful to you for spending time with us. It would have been even better if you had been able to join us, but it's not your fault, it's our fault. And we would like you to know that the message that you've given us will stay with us. It will be a part of our discussions for the rest of the next year and so on, as we think about how best we can engage African governments on the public health challenges that we face in the region. So we appreciate you, and we do hope that you'll enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you very, very much.